Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be presenting on the effects of a pandemic on online retail. Table of contents. Here we have the layout of the presentation. We have the introduction, where I will talk about the industry we will be discussing, the background, where I will discuss the history of the online retail industry. We have the effects of the pandemic, where we will discuss or take an in-depth look as to how the pandemic has affected this industry. And then we have the conclusion, where I will summarize everything that was discussed throughout the presentation. The introduction. Throughout the presentation, we will take a look at the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the industry of online retail. We will then look at the changes in consumer behavior and how it has affected the supply chain. Then we will look at the strategies adopted by online retailers to help combat the negative impacts of this pandemic. Before we can begin discussing our actual topic, we have to do some research. Through our research, we found that the history of online retail can be traced back to 1995 when Amazon and eBay were first launched. Since the launch of Amazon and eBay, many other major corporations noticed the appeal of having a presence online and started offering their goods and services on the internet. While many consumers still did not trust online purchases completely, there were a significant number of people who enjoyed the convenience of online shopping and the variety of choices they were presented online. The COVID-19 pandemic affected customers and consumer behavior in a variety of different ways. While some consumers were more conservative about spending money due to economic insecurity, others resorted to panic purchases and bulk buying. This same behavioral change in turn affected the online retail industry directly. And while some adapted to changes in the market and benefited dramatically from the situation, others were either forced to downsize or completely shut down. We will now look at the effects of the pandemic. After the corona pandemic spread across the globe, we were also witness to another type of news. Due to the panic caused by the pandemic, people were stocking up on various products, causing online and physical stores to be unable to keep up with the high demand. Products such as toilet paper, masks, and hand sanitizers in particular were very high in demand and were constantly out of stock. Quarantine finally took in effect. Many turned to online shopping either for safety reasons or in adherence to government regulations. This is when the online industry saw a dramatic rise in consumer activity. Next slide, we will see just how dramatic this rise actually was. Digital Commerce 360. According to Digital Commerce 360, online consumers spent about $861.2 billion in the US alone. This shows an increase of almost 44% from the previous year. In the image provided, we can see a total of 3 charts. In the first one, we take a look at e-commerce sales, where we see that in 2019, we were at 598, and in 2020, we were at 861. This shows a 44% increase. Then the second chart we can see is the total retail sales. We see that from 2019 to 2020, there was a 6.9 increase in these sales. And the last chart that we see on this image is web penetration. And we see that it went from 15.8% in 2019 to 21.3% in 2020. Scope. Before we can go further into detail into our topic, it is important that we mention that throughout the presentation, we will mainly focus on the effects of online retail. Our research will not include how the retail industry has been affected. We will only focus on online retail. The presentation will not address impacts of this pandemic on physical stores or any other industry. We will also only be researching the effect the coronavirus pandemic had on the online retail industry. We will not look at any other factors that may have impacted the online market. The effects caused by the pandemic when it comes to online retail was supply difficulties. There were a variety of different factors that played a role in the significant delays and issues in the supply chain. A tragically high number of deaths due to the rapid spread of coronavirus and government lockdown mandates caused a significant decrease in the workforce globally. Furthermore, many companies who didn't have a strong online presence and platform went bankrupt. All of these factors caused a significant delay and issues in the supply chain. There were other factors or situations such as natural disasters that had an effect on the supply chain, but as mentioned earlier, we will only be focusing on the coronavirus. The larger and older companies were able to absorb the losses due to the disrupted supply chain. Many small and medium-sized enterprises or corporations were unable to meet customer demands. Next slide will include a survey conducted by Dun and Bradstreet, where we will look at just how these small businesses and medium-sized businesses were affected. In the survey, the results show that 82% of small businesses faced negative impacts. 70% were convinced it would take them about a year or two to get back to where they were before the pandemic, and 60% required help or are expecting to receive assistance from the government. On from supply difficulties, we will now look at consumer behavioral changes. As mentioned previously, this pandemic caused many businesses to downsize. These downsizes and bankruptcies caused a rise in unemployment, and this increase in the rate was so high that this pandemic is known to be greater than the Great Recession, based on the Pew Research Center. Due to unemployment and unstable finances, people became a lot more cautious of how they chose to spend their money. While the demand for basic necessities increased, the same cannot be said for discretionary spending, which will face a decrease, especially in regards to more expensive items such as vehicles and consumer electronics. It's also important to mention that research also shows that the consumer adaptation to online shopping is here to stay after the pandemic is over. On from consumer behavioral changes, we will now look at online retail strategies. In response to limitations faced by consumers when making online purchases of specific items or products, businesses had to come up with new and ingenious and innovative solutions. All of this was made possible through the use of augmented reality and virtual reality technology. This type of technology allowed businesses to provide customers with more information and visuals when it came to their products. In the next slide, we will look at an example of a major corporation and how they are making use of these new technologies. Amazon's virtual fitting rooms. The major corporation, known as Amazon, is developing a virtual fitting room shopping app that can help you choose clothing based on your style and body size. The app is set to utilize customer social media pictures to ascertain a visual mannequin for each customer. Amazon's virtual fitting room is still in the works. There are similar products or similar apps that have similar concepts to what Amazon is currently developing, and they too use the same type of technology mentioned earlier on in the presentation. For looking at the online retail strategies, we will now look at the income levels and online retail, which is another thing that was affected by the pandemic of the coronavirus. According to a study done by Unkrishnan, households above the poverty line are almost twice as likely to make online purchases compared to households below the poverty line. This very fact can be due to a number of reasons. One of those being that lower income households have less access to disposable income when it comes to shopping habits, while higher income households can afford to pay additional charges for same day or next day delivery. Lower income households are more likely to opt for in-store purchases to avoid those additional costs, such as shipping and processing. Then could also be because lower income families often have a lot more limited access to technologies and usually have a lower education level than someone from a higher income household. The conclusion. After the different effects that the coronavirus pandemic has had on the online retail industry, we have now come to our conclusion. Since the mass-induced panic brought on by the coronavirus pandemic, businesses and consumers have had about 15 months to adjust to this new lifestyle. Adapting to online purchases and utilizing online retail has not been a smooth transition. As mentioned earlier on in the presentation, some consumers were more conservative about spending money due to economic insecurity. Reason as to why this transition to online shopping wasn't so smooth. Another reason as to why this transition wasn't so smooth could also be because there were a lot of businesses, like the smaller and medium-sized ones, who didn't have as much influence or online presence as the larger corporations. While many small and medium-sized businesses were unable to adjust to the changes in the industry, larger corporations were a lot more lucky. These larger corporations not only managed to flourish, but they also managed to introduce innovative technologies that could further revolutionize the online retail industry forever. The technologies we are referring to are those of augmented reality and virtual reality. Had the smaller and medium-sized businesses been more aware of these technologies, they probably would have been a lot better off during this pandemic. This new technology isn't new, and the concept behind this form of reality isn't new either. However, it isn't very easy to understand, especially if someone is not familiar with this concept. The changes in consumer behavior when it comes to online retail markets have also impacted this industry. Earlier in the presentation, we mentioned that the consumer adaptation to the online market is likely not to end after this pandemic is over. And that is because once a customer orders from a store online and successfully receives their purchase, they are a lot more likely to place more orders online and place more trust in online retail. Shopping also offers customers more benefits than physical stores could never hope to compete with, such as more choices, it's more convenient, and least of all, shopping helps customers avoid traffic and crowds. The transition from physical stores to online shopping hasn't been smooth. However, in a few years, with more people who choose to shop online, it is likely that physical stores will lose a lot of their customers. Here we have our works cited pages, and they continue on to the next page. And that being said, we have reached the end of our presentation on the impact that the pandemic of the coronavirus has had on the online retail industry. We would like to thank you for your time. If there is any questions, confusion, or concerns from something mentioned in the presentation, feel free to let us know. One of my group members, Yasra and Marlon, or even myself, can try and help you out. You can leave the questions down in the discussion post.